So it's time to simplify our lives a little bit by using Jquery and a package called Jquery Validate in order to do our form validation. And right now, this is our register form. It does exactly what I want, but this is really kind of awkward. And actually putting the JavaScript right in the HTML the way we have, it's a little awkward as well. And there's a more elegant solution. So let's go back to our Atom editor and get rid of the things we wrote last time. And the first thing to get rid of is in the opening form tag. I need to get rid of this onSubmit return validate. I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to scroll to the very bottom of the page, and I'm going to get rid of this function that we wrote, script, all the way down to the script tag. So the function validate, if document, the return true, all of that goes. And you'll notice I've already added one thing for you. This is the Jquery validate package. Now I'll show you where I got it, and I'll show you how easy it is to install this. So I'm going to go back to my web browser, and I'm going to open a new tab and go to a place called cdnjs.cloudflare.com. And I'll put that link in the course resources as well. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to start searching for certain packages. Now this is a free service offered by a company called Cloudflare that puts the most popular JavaScript and CSS libraries on a content delivery network for you. And as we've done so far, we're not going to bother downloading the package and installing it on our machine. Instead, we'll just link to one on a CDN. So I'm looking for a package that starts with the name Jquery, and then it's called Validate. So I type Jquery Validate, and it automatically finds the ones that I'm looking for. So this is exactly the one that I'm looking for. So I click on it, and it gives me a bunch of different things I can download. I could download additional methods. I'm not going to right now. I could download the minified version of that or the unminified version of Jquery Validate, but this is the one that I want. So I just copied that. I went back to my source code, and I wrote a script source equals, and then pasted in the full URL to that library. Now I have access to it. So right now I have Jquery installed, I have Jquery Validate installed, and I have the Bootstrap JavaScript methods, which we haven't seen yet, but we will. I have all of those installed and available to me. So just to make sure that everything is working the way that it should, let's write a very simple routine that will display an alert. But this time I'm not going to do it the way that I did last time. I'm going to use one of Jquery's built-in methods. Now Jquery is JavaScript, so obviously it has to have an opening and closing script tag before I can even use it. In between those tags, I'm going to write my first line of Jquery, and it starts with a $sign. And this is the syntax that the people who wrote Jquery decided they wanted to use to indicate that I'm going to use something that's built into the JavaScript library Jquery. Then I'm going to open some parentheses, and I'm going to refer to my document. So document, close that parentheses, and then I'm going to call a built-in method that's available to us from Jquery, ready. Now this is onDocument ready, and all this really says is, after all of the necessary resources have loaded on the end user's browser, I want you to execute something. Now what we're going to execute is an anonymous function, and it's written like this: function, with no arguments in this case, open parentheses, and return. So I'm going to put a closing semicolon here, as you're supposed to. Everything that's between this opening curly brace bracket and this closing curly brace bracket will execute only when the document is ready, when the web page is in a state where we can safely execute some JavaScript. And what I'm going to execute is something we've seen already, just to make sure that this works. Alert, hello world. And I'm going to save that, go back to my web browser, go back to the tab where my register page is, and I'm going to reload it. And what should happen is the web page should load, and then when the document is in a safe state, it should fire that alert. Let's make sure that actually happens. And it does. There's my hello world. Well, that's really good, but it's not what I want to do. I want to do some validation. Well, it turns out that this library we downloaded a minute ago, or installed a minute ago, called Jquery Validate, it makes form validation an absolute breeze. So we'll do it the very simple way first, and then we'll make it a little more elegant and make it look good with our Bootstrap theming. So the way that it works is really straightforward. I need to refer to the form that I want to validate. So how can I find the exact form that I want on my page? Well, one of the things that I can do, I already know what an ID is. I can come up to the very top of my form and give my form an ID. ID equals register form. And as I usually do, the name and the ID, I make exactly the same value. That way I always know what they are. Let's go back down here, and now I want to use Jquery and Jquery validate to refer to that form. And I do it using this syntax. $, this is a Jquery function, open parentheses. Now I'm not referring to the document as I did on this line. Instead, I want to refer to the ID register form. And I do that by using quotes, then typing a hash mark, and then the name of the ID that I'm looking for. In this case, register form. And then I put a dot, and I call one of the methods available to me in the Jquery validate package. And what I want to call is validate. Now that's great. I've now, when the document is ready, I'm going to force the form, register form, to use Jquery validate. But I still haven't told it what I want it to do. Well, this is where CSS and JavaScript kind of intersect a little bit. It is entirely possible for any element on a form or anything on a web page really to give it a class name that doesn't match an actual CSS class or CSS rule that I've defined. So let's go back up to the very top of our form and find the input type equals text for first name. Now this has a class already. It's got a class called form control. But if I put a space after that, before the quotation mark, and I type the class required and save it, well, that doesn't really seem to make much sense because when you think about it, there is no CSS class called required. At least I didn't write one. I'm pretty sure that Bootstrap doesn't have one. So what is this class doing here? This is a class name that's used to be able to select one or more elements on a web page. So just for fun, let's go down here to the second input for last name, and let's give it the class of required as well. And we'll go one more down to username, which is actually an email address for us, and we'll give it the class of required, but we'll also give it the class of email. Now I'm going to save that. And what I've done so far is for the very first 3 inputs on my form, those are first name, last name, and username, I've given all 3 the class required, meaning that they have to be entered before people can submit the form. And I've also made the email one, I've given that the class of email as well. So it's both required and must be in the form of an email address. So let's save this, switch back to our web browser, reload the page to make sure that it's correct, and just to be safe, I'm going to open my JavaScript console and make sure there's no errors. Nope, no errors, that looks good. So now let's register. And you'll notice what happened here is that the first name field gets a little label underneath it. This field is required. This field is required. And that's all 3 required fields. Now watch what happens as I type in the first one. I type in John. That message went away. I type in the last one, Smith. That message goes away. Now watch the next one. As I start typing an email address, some user, notice how the message changed to please enter a valid email address. And when I keep typing at home.ca, it actually it matches the rules for an email address. Now this is a much simpler type of form validation. All I need to do is make sure that I'm referring to Jquery and the Jquery validation library, put an onDocumentReady function at the bottom that puts the validate against this form, and then add some classes. And this is really a simple way of doing things. Much easier than manually writing a function that checks to see whether a field exists or if a field is in a particular format. And it actually gets better than that as well. So one of the things that I wanted to do was ensure that a user types his or her email address and then retypes it, and that the 2 values are both there and email addresses and they match. Now, how might I do that? Well, let's go back to our source code and find out how we might do that. There's an additional method of writing rules for validation in Jquery validate. And you can actually find its website. I'll post a link to the website that gives you access to all of its documentation. But they're really easy rules to write. So what I want to do here is in between the parentheses where I say validate, I'm actually going to put opening and closing brace brackets and then hit return so I can get another line. And I'm going to type rules, colon, open parentheses, And in between these parentheses, I'll write the rules, the ones that I can't do easily with class names. And what I want to do is ensure that confirm or verify username, which is my verify password, it has some rules associated with it. And I open another brace bracket to define those rules. And then I type the rules. Required, true, comma, email, true, comma, and then equal to username. But I can't type username like that. It needs to be referring to an actual element on the page. So I'll backspace over that and write hashmark username. And that's all I have to do. So if I save this and look at it, what we have here is a pretty simple way of doing things. I have, first of all, I'm going to validate the entire form, but I also want to execute this rule. The rule is for the field called verify username, I want to make that required. That's already covered by the class, but there's no harm in putting it here. I want to make it an email. That's also covered by the class email we gave it, but there's no harm in putting it here. But here's the one that I can't easily do just by assigning a class name. It has to be equal to the field with the ID of username. So let's save that, go back to our web browser, reload this page, and try it again. So first of all, let's try submitting it. No, that didn't work. Okay. So let's try this. My first name is John. My last name is Smith. Those go away. My email is john@smith.com. Good. Now my verifying email, I'll make a mistake here. John with two N's @smith.com. And the message changes to please enter the same value again. Now if I go up and delete the extra N, that message goes away. And now I can submit my form. So that's a much more elegant way of validating data on a form. Now, as I said a couple of lectures ago, verifying form contents using only JavaScript is evil. You must never, ever do that. When we actually get looking at PHP and handling things at the server side, we're going to have a second level of validation that forces users to enter the correct information, even if they've got JavaScript turned off on their web browser, which is easy enough to do. So we'll validate it first at the client level with JavaScript, and then we'll validate it again at the server level with some code that we'll write. But we're not quite that far yet. We'll get there before too long.